During the last year or so, I had a young couple. By the way, they're looking younger and younger as I get older and older. But I had a young couple come to me. They were actually in their late 20s, and they wanted to get married. Now, one of the things I do with them in order to get married is I make them fill out all the vital statistics. I make them take a marriage survey online, and then we have a few sessions of talking about that. And provided all of that goes well, I say yes to the wedding. But as we were filling out the vital statistics for this couple, I go through, name, address, phone number, email address, date of birth, date of baptism, current church affiliation. And she answers Roman Catholic. And he answers, well, I was baptized Lutheran, but now I'm an atheist. Really? Interesting that they should come to the church for a wedding. But okay. At any rate, how many of you know someone in their 20s who would claim to be an agnostic or an atheist, something like that? Anybody know a few of those? Yeah, I do too. He lives in my house. Actually, he lives in Denver. But the one in my house also, believe it or not, the kids of two pastors have both come to the point of saying, as my son Philip in Denver says, Mom, it's all made up. Religion is just all made up. We humans created it because we needed it. Really? That's not what we taught you, Philip. That's not what you heard in Sunday school. But that's what he's come to believe. And he is 29. Yes, we all probably know someone in their 20s who would say, I'm either a non-believer, an atheist, or an agnostic. The Pew Research Foundation will actually corroborate what we have noticed in our own lives. They've discovered that 1/3, 1 out of 3 people below the age of 30 say that they do not believe or are agnostic or are atheist. 1 in 3. Just to give you a little comparison, the same survey discovered that for those of us, well, I'm not quite there yet, but 65 and older, not quite there yet, 65 and older, it's 1 in 10. 1 in 10 versus 1 in 3. That's a huge difference, isn't it? So for every 3 people under 30, 1 of them says they don't believe. It's common. And judging from the smiles that I saw on your faces, you in fact do know a few of these people, even if you didn't raise your hand. They look at the faith that we have, and they call it foolishness. Sound like a word you've heard before? In this one of the first scripture lesson from Paul. Let me read it to you out of the Message. Paul has this way of writing that makes sense, but you got to follow the line of thinking. And this is one of those passages. So let me read it to you out of the Message, and maybe it will make a little more sense. The message that points to Christ on the cross seems like sheer silliness to those hell-bent on destruction. That would be an accurate description that the 30 and under crowd would say. It's just silliness. I'm going to go my own way. I'm going to do my own thing. That religion thing, it's silly. So it's sheer silliness to those who are hell-bent on destruction, but for those on the way of salvation, it makes perfect sense. And so those of us who sit in pews like this every weekend are going, why don't they believe? It makes perfect sense to us, but to them, it's pure silliness. And we're scratching our heads saying, how can that be? This is the way God works, and most powerfully, as it turns out. It's written, I'll turn conventional wisdom on its head. I'll expose so-called experts as crackpots. So, where can you find someone truly wise, truly educated, truly intelligent in this day and age? Should we go to Canisius or UB? Damon? Can we find someone there who's truly wise, intelligent? Hasn't God exposed it all as pretentious nonsense, which, by the way, is not an excuse for not studying? Since the world in all its fancy wisdom never had a clue when it came to knowing God, God, in his wisdom, took delight in using what the world considered dumb, the preaching of all things, to bring those who trust him into the way of salvation. Used what appeared to be dumb, preaching, to bring people into the way of salvation. Now, I'm not talking about preaching like I do. I don't think that's at all what Paul means. I think Paul means telling the story. Simply sharing the good news is, for him, preaching. Uses what is dumb to actually bring people to salvation. So now, how do we approach the under 30 bunch? Some of them live in our own homes, and some of them we just work with, and some of them are just family, extended family members. How do we finally bring them to understand that all that we do here isn't foolishness, isn't silliness, isn't dumb? It is quite simply by sharing our faith, talking about the good news of Jesus. What's Jesus mean to you? You see, they look at the cross of Christ, which you and I see as salvation. And what do they see? How in heaven's name could God somehow bring about salvation, first of all, by one person? Isn't that a question we've heard? How could one person save all of humanity? And why do we need some one person to save me? Can't I do it by myself? Isn't that the mantra of our generation? You lift yourself up by your own bootstraps. Work hard. You can succeed. You've heard it. And yet, we look at that cross and we see salvation. Those who don't believe, those who are agnostic, those who are atheists, they look at that cross and say, tell me how a criminal's death is going to save me. Really? Because that's the kind of death Jesus died. But you and I look at that cross and understand more fully that that criminal's death, in fact, paid a price for everybody to bring us back into a relationship with God. Some look at it and say it's foolishness, silliness, dumb. We look at it and see hope and joy and salvation. So how are we going to bring those who see it as silly to faith? Paul says it's by preaching. God uses what everybody else thinks is dumb. And trust me, my kids, as they were growing up and watched their mom and their dad every Saturday spend the whole day fretting over a sermon, and they'd say, well, this is really stupid. They saw it as dumb. But sharing faith, sharing good news, coming to understand who Jesus is by sharing it with one another is the best way, Paul says, and I think as well, to help people come to faith. Talk about it. And that doesn't mean, guys, you have all the answers. I can't tell you how many times I've listened to people say, well, I couldn't do that, like teach Sunday school. I don't know enough. Really? You know enough. And you'll learn, and you're nodding your head, Gene, you'll learn while you teach, don't you? An awful lot you learn while you teach. And trust me, I learn while I preach. We all learn while we do. Pastor Mary Ellen has been in conversation, sort of infrequently, but periodically, with one of our under 30 bunch who has a whole bunch of questions and had the courage to come to us and say, how do I answer my friends who say God isn't real? And Pastor Mary Ellen says, why don't you and I, and maybe some of your friends, go to lunch once in a while and sit and talk about it? And they do. Do we have all the answers for all of those questions? Pastor Mary Ellen says, she's been there. No, we don't. But we struggle together to look for those answers, to understand it more fully. The Monday morning Bible study, God bless them, they ask some of the strangest and oddest questions, and I love them for it. They push both of us. She teaches it at the moment, but I fill in for her periodically, and I used to teach it all the time. And they push. I love it. Do I always have the right answer for them? No, but we struggle together to find that answer. And it's in struggling together, in that conversation, in that preaching, that we grow in our understanding and our faith. So how are we going to get the under 30 bunch to look at the faith that we have as anything other than foolishness or silliness or dumb? It can't come by sitting here moaning and groaning about the fact that they don't believe. It can only come by our conversations with them, sometimes one-on-one, sometimes bringing them here to hear the good news preached this way. Sometimes it's inviting them to lunch and struggling with those questions together. It's not always easy, and I will grant you that. But you and I have come to understand, like Paul, that that cross isn't foolishness. That cross is salvation. And that's good news. But Paul says it's a stumbling block for some. Yeah. So let's help them understand rather than just criticize. Let's help them grow in their faith rather than point fingers. We're all in this together, and Paul has made it abundantly clear, and so has Jesus, that all of us are missionaries. In our baptism, we are all made witnesses, missionaries, evangelists. I know you don't like that word. We talked about it a couple weeks ago. But in reality, that's who we are. That's who we've been made because of our faith. Friends, when you've got good news, don't you want to share it with somebody? If the Broncos win the Super Bowl this afternoon, won't you want to call up somebody who had to work and couldn't see it and tell them? Okay, I'm sorry, if you're a Seattle fan. See, I even know who's playing. Yay! Wouldn't you call somebody up and tell them that? Because it's good news. When God is at work in your life, don't you want to share that with somebody? We keep that to ourselves. And that under 30 bunch is not going to come to faith if you and I don't preach, or, to use the words of our liturgy early on, show and tell the good news. You remember what show and tell was when you were in elementary school? It was your chance to tell a story or to bring in an object that meant something to you or whatever. Show and tell sometimes deteriorated. Show and tell was this opportunity, when I was a kid anyway, to really be able to kind of let people know who I was and what it was I got and what I thought and what had happened to me. And I could hardly wait to share during show and tell. I pray that all of us who see that cross as salvation have that same kind of enthusiasm about sharing the good news with others, about walking together with the questions, which we don't all have answers to. But together we search for them. Because you and I know that cross isn't foolishness. That cross is the power of God saving us. So let's help others understand that and grow together in faith.